Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're here to talk about the responsibilities of employers towards LGBTQ plus employees. Now, we know that society has got a bit more inclusive over the last few years, but LGBTQ plus employees still have a lot of barriers to overcome in the workplace. Many feel that they can't be who they are in the workplace, and many still face bullying and harassment. So I'm joined today by some fantastic guests who are going to kindly share their own experiences so that we can learn about what they've been through and how to create a more supportive and inclusive environment for everybody who's at work. I'd like to say that we're going to be recording this conversation, so you'll be able to share it afterwards and watch on demand. And we'll take any questions that you have for the panel towards the end of the conversation. But anyway, it's time to meet our guests. It's a fantastic panel that we've got today. First of all, can I introduce Steve O'Donoghue, who is the Director of Corporate Services for the Trade Remedies Authority. Good morning and good afternoon, Stephen. Thanks very much for joining us.
Hi there, Jane. Great to be here. Thank you.
We also have Craig Stephenson, OBE. Now, Craig has so many titles, I don't really know where to start, but I guess the main reason that Craig is joining us today is the work that he did in the Welsh Parliament, where he set up the Dignity and Respect programme. So, Craig, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Jane. Pronouns are pawb. Good afternoon, everyone, from a sort of sunny South Wales.
And we have Hen Cowen. Hen is a communications manager for the England and Wales Cricket Board and is part of the movement within the organisation to encourage more LGBTQ plus people to both work in the organisation, feel comfortable working in the organisation, and to help more people play the game of cricket. Hen, hello.
Hi, Jane. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Harris Eddie Hill is a podcaster and author and works to help companies with their inclusive workplace strategies. Harris, welcome to you. Oh, Harris, we're still having a little bit of problem hearing Harris, so hopefully we'll come back a little bit later. And Emma Goswell joins us. Emma is a well-known radio presenter and podcaster and also an author of the book Coming Out Stories. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. So we will take some questions a little bit later. So if you have any, do please pop them in the chat and in the comments. And as I say, we'll be recording this as we go along. I really just wanted to start, first of all, because story sharing is so important when learning about issues like this. So I'd like to start with the different experiences that you've all had in the workplace over the years. And Craig, I wanted to come to you first because you actually came out when there was still Section 28, I believe, at a time when people didn't really know much about HIV and AIDS. So it was a very different place and society and workplace when you were able to feel comfortable enough to come out.
Yeah, that's right, Jane. I joined the civil service in 1981 and I took an early retirement in 2019. So I've seen it all change throughout the years. So I suppose I was coming out in the mid 80s, towards the end of the 80s. And of course we had Clause 28 of the Local Government Act, which forbade any teachings about LGBTQ issues as a kind of what they called a pretended family lifestyle. HIV and AIDS was around it's still around, but the fear mongering around HIV and AIDS was around at that time going into the 90s. And so it didn't feel like a very, however empowered I felt with my friends, my LGBTQ friends, I didn't feel like a safe place to be in kind of the wider society or in the workplace. I can remember things like being at a work Christmas party on site and someone shouting, "Get your back against the wall, boys," as I walked down the corridor to go to the loo. And I thought, oh my God, they know, and I'm not even out, and I haven't really told anyone. And I could just remember the whole time with colleagues who I got on really well with, and coined the term froligs. They become friends sometimes in work, and but I just editing my conversations with them about who I'd been with at the weekend, where I'd been, who I'd been on holiday, what I did on my annual leave. It was just editing the whole time because I couldn't be my true self as it was. And so that is absolutely exhausting. Stonewall had a wonderful phrase about people perform better when they can be themselves. So there is a responsibility on workplaces to create inclusive and safe environments for people to be themselves. Work is about performance. You want people to perform best. It's a workplace. You're producing stuff. So it's for HR teams and leadership to make sure that they set the right tone and the culture within their organizations. Fast forward, I became more empowered. I got involved in when we got devolution in 1999. I worked at the parliamentary building in Cardiff Bay, and joined a network then. And then in 2006, the Government of Wales Act separated the Welsh Government from the parliamentary end of things. And the Welsh Government, which was much bigger than us, had 5,000 staff, etc. They inherited all the Investors in People, the Stonewall Championship, and all of those. And we reapplied for things. And Steve will know we basically started from scratch. Risk policies, everything. They all belong to the bigger bits that got separated off, or we got separated off. So I at that point, in terms of becoming more senior in the organisation, I also started an LGBTQ network, and then started engaging with the HR side of things so that we could sort of what you'd now call an equality impact assessment, so we could look at policies with the HR colleagues and see whether there was any negative impact on us as a team and that kind of thing. And then incrementally introduced things to make us more LGBT inclusive, celebrating LGBT History Month. We had flagpoles, so we put flags up. And for International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia and Transphobia, we'd do something, we do photo calls. We started an allies program, and incrementally over the years, we got better and better at being more LGBTQ inclusive. And as well as being recognised in Wales as one of the top public sector employers in 2018, we became the top organisation in the United Kingdom in the Stonewall's Workplace Equality Index. So there's some great things from my start and kind of like the empowerment journey that I went through, the working with colleagues and all that kind of thing. And I often say in these things, you actually don't need to throw a bucket load of money at these things. It's about leadership. It's about planning. It's about creating the right culture. It's about taking the organisation with you. And that's why we did that incremental approach to it, so to not to bombard everyone with LGBT stuff. And some of the knock-on effects from that, which I think were really positive, were the Women's Network saw how successful we were being as a network, and they became stronger. The Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Network, they became stronger. The Parents and Carers Network, they became stronger. So all of these people found their voice, almost like in a rubbing off process, and we were all able to exchange information, stories, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, Craig, let's pass this over to Hen, because Hen, you're in an organisation where you're trying to do a lot of the things that Craig has already had success with previously. Can you sort of relate your experience, Hen, and how you're trying to make a difference then within the ECB?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great to hear all of that insight and history from Craig there. I guess an interesting thing about working for a national governing body like the England and Wales Cricket Board, I'm sure it's similar at the FA, the RFU, etc., is as well as the people within your organisation, you also have fans, you also have external stakeholders. So it's one slightly different element of working for a national governing body, in my case, looking after cricket, because as well as everyone in the game, cricketers, coaches, physios, logistics and operation staff, and there's a lot of people. You've also got the fans. So it's kind of two journeys running at once. You know, you're trying to get everybody within cricket to create the right culture, as Craig talked about, and to become as inclusive as possible. But equally, while you're doing that, you're trying to raise awareness so that everyone who comes to watch a cricket match understands that journey, is part of that journey, and shares that as well. So that in turn, when they go and play, if they play, that they're doing the same things at their cricket clubs. So Craig's story, and I'm sure Steve's, Emma's and Harris's will have lots of similar insights in terms of trying to change people's behaviour and trying to get people to understand and to empathise, is really interesting. I think with an NGB, you're in a not unique, but you're in an interesting again position, because you've almost got two strands to it. So yes, we are trying very hard to activate and motivate the game of cricket to be as equal, as diverse and as inclusive as possible, and that absolutely includes LGBTQ plus rights and participation. I mean, the way that we look at it in the employee network that I run is, if you are a queer 6, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old child and you go and play cricket, how welcome are you going to be made to feel walking into that clubhouse? How welcome are you going to be made to feel in the stands, watching TV, etc., etc.? So there's an awful lot to it, which I'm sure everybody on the panel today can attest to in different ways.
And Hen, could I just ask you about your own sort of personal experience as well, because it's not been that long, I believe, that you've been able to be who you are at work. Can you sort of tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So for a long time, I identified and was kind of out as a gay man. You know, work that had been done by generations before me, felt I was probably better able to be out as a gay man in my office in, I don't know when I started at the ECB, 2016, 2017. And that was good. You know, it certainly wasn't perfect from a company-wide point of view. But actually, I knew that wasn't the end of my journey. And a couple of years ago, I came out as trans non-binary and started using they, them pronouns, which has been a huge improvement in my life, and something which far more accurately reflects who I am. It's been very difficult, but it's funny because it's not something I ever thought I'd get to. I'd written it off in my head when I was about 10 years old. I thought I'll never share that bit of me with anyone ever. And I have now, and I kind of got to a point where I felt I had to. It was life limiting to not be honest and to not be authentic and to not be real, but it was still very difficult. So I shared that with my work and with my friends, etc., probably around 18 months ago. And it's been a really positive thing for me personally, although, you know, not without its difficulties, but certainly moving in the right direction.
Thank you for sharing that. And Harris, your journey, has your journey been similar to Hen's?
Not necessarily. I mean, I came out as trans non-binary nearly 9 years ago. And during that time, I was self-employed. So I didn't really have to navigate the world of work. And just a correction that I'm a health and wellbeing coach for the NHS. I don't educate businesses on gender stuff anymore, although I used to. But I came out, as I said, nearly 9 years ago during a long period of time when I was self-employed. So everyone who worked with me knew, and I just had private clients and that was it. So I didn't have to deal with any of that. And before I became self-employed, I worked for a small engineering company that still had a problem with 1950s style misogyny. So being trans, I didn't have a hope in hell, unfortunately. And you know, getting back into employment, and particularly in the NHS, which are, you know, and they're usually pretty good compared to other places, it's been lovely in that the intention is extremely positive, generally speaking. The execution of inclusivity is still quite embryonic. So when there have been issues, or, you know, I've been put into mandatory trainings where they haven't even asked the company that I'm training with, you know, are you kind of up to date. Are you an inclusive company? Are you aware of they them pronouns? Do you know that they exist? There was none of that, so I got thrown under the bus a few times by accident. It wasn't intentional, but it also wasn't even thought of.
Yeah.
And when interacting with other colleagues, there wasn't really no one had any conversations with anybody to make sure that I was supported and that I wasn't going to face discrimination. And unfortunately, there was one colleague who kept misgendering me. And I tried to have a very open conversation. You know, I've been out and proud for a long time. I'm very practiced and feel very easygoing about it. But, you know, he wasn't open to those conversations. And eventually I unfortunately had to get HR involved just to kind of have a word with him and make him stop. And then he hasn't spoken to me since.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's a very difficult situation. Emma, you're like Harris in a way, slightly similar in terms of you have to introduce yourself to new people all the time because you're freelance, aren't you? So do you find that you have to kind of repeatedly almost tell people who you are again every time you have somebody that new that you're working for?
I suppose so, but I think that is true for anybody that's part of the LGBTQ spectrum. We're always coming out, and this is something I talk about on the podcast all the time. You know, people don't just have this one big moment. Yes, it's a big moment when you tell your parent or carer or your family, but actually as LGBT people, we are coming out, you know, on a daily basis. You know, whenever you move house, move to a new area, which I've just done, I've had to come out to all the neighbours. Yes, hi, we're your lesbian neighbours with a new baby. Whenever you start a new job, if you join a new social group, anything that you do, you find yourself being outed. I mean, think about how many people you interact with on a daily basis. For example, I had an Uber driver once who actually turned around and asked me, "Are you two sisters?" And I was like, "No, we're lovers. Not that it's any business of yours," but people always want to know. But I think, yeah, that's a misconception about LGBT people, that it's this one big, yeah, hey, I'm here, I'm queer, you know, I'm not going shopping. But actually you're constantly having those conversations and constantly negotiating it and constantly evaluating whether it is safe or not to have that conversation. I mean, actually with the Uber driver, I made the conclusion that I'd say that flippant comment because it was the end of the journey. If it had been the beginning of the journey, would I want to sit in a taxi with a man who was thinking about what I might be doing with my girlfriend in the back of the taxi? No, I wouldn't necessarily have done that. So you're always evaluating your safety and evaluating whether or not to come out. But I mean, what I've done through my career is make a point of being as out as possible. And I've made being part of the LGBT community my USP. And I'm one of the most out people I know. And people employ me because I'm a lesbian, not despite the fact that I'm a lesbian. So I just got approached by the BBC to help make a new podcast about gay marriage because my name is known out there and I'm the person that's done all the research and has a lot of contacts, and I've made my career gay, basically. I've worked for Gadio, the world's biggest gay radio station. I then worked for Virgin Radio Pride. I've made a lot of LGBT podcasts and we've got the book as well. I'm going to plug it. There you go. So, you know, I've made my career out of being an out and proud lesbian, and I've just turned it on its head so that is now why people employ me.
And then can I come to Steve, because Steve, really your story is quite different because you have come out later in life, like Craig, you know, and Hen, you work in sort of much more formal organisations. And can you tell us about your experience and how that has impacted you?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jane. It's fascinating to hear the other stories as well and just how diverse they are across the panel. So firstly, hello, everyone, and thank you for taking the time out to listen to us today. I'm Steve. You'll probably see that I work at the Trade Remedies Authority. If you're wondering what that is, we were created by legislation in June 2021, so a new public body, and our role is to defend the UK's interests, economic interests, against unfair international trade practices. Now, as a new public body, one of the goals that we set was to build an expert and innovative organisation where our people really enjoy working. And that means, we have to be an inclusive workplace. We absolutely want to celebrate equality and diversity as part of that. And for me personally, diversity and inclusion is incredibly important, as well as it being important to my leadership role. So I sit on both the board and our senior leadership team. So I am responsible with my colleagues for making sure we are that welcoming and inclusive place to work. So I was in my early 40s, which is around 10 years ago. You might find that hard to believe. It was a different time in the workplace compared to Craig's experience, and that's thanks to people like Craig and previous generations, as Hen said. I was divorced from the mum of our two wonderful daughters, and it took me a little while to come to a realization and acceptance that I wanted to live the rest of my life as an openly gay man. And it was a really profound moment for me. And it's far easier to talk about it now than it was at the time, of course. I was hugely grateful to Craig and the LGBT staff network that had been created at the Welsh Parliament at the time. Craig was the chair of that. We had a number of one-to-one conversations, and it felt a very safe space for me to explore this confusion I was feeling at the time. And we also had an employee assistance program that I was able to talk to about this stuff going on in my head. I found that incredibly helpful. And I think Emma just said, this coming out journey and experience that goes on and on and on. Well, as a straight man previously, I'd never experienced it. We just society accepts, kind of at the time, everyone's straight and you're odd if you're not. And I just love the fact that society has changed so much in a fairly short space of time, and nothing warms me more than seeing a same-sex couple walking down the road holding hands, for example. It just warms my cockles, because that's something that even now I don't do. So being true to myself became really important. And that helped me feel much better as a person, much more comfortable and relaxed. But I lived with this fear of telling everyone that this is the new Steve, if you like, and how would they react? Would I face rejection? Would I upset them? Would I be hurting their feelings and alienate them? And I didn't want to do that with my friends and family. And thank goodness, none of them did react in that way. I just got a whole load of love and support. My daughters were wonderful. My family were wonderful. I took the advice of a friend of mine who said, because I was particularly nervous about telling my dad, he said, well, why don't you write him a letter? So you're not in that confrontational position where he might react and then you might react and then it all blows up. And I took that advice, and it was wonderful because it worked incredibly well. I think it worked well for my dad. He wrote back to me, and he just said, always welcome in this house, son. And our relationship didn't change as a result of it, and that was fantastic. And it was difficult, a man in his 70s, big rugby player, traditional views on these things. And yet we moved to a good new place with me having come out. So I was just going to touch on Audit Wales. I moved to after the Welsh Parliament. It was a new environment there. We were building from scratch, so we got involved in the Stonewall Champions Network. We submitted for the Workplace Equality Index. We made an Iris Prize video as well. That really shifted the culture forward. And now, as I'm in the Trade Remedies Authority, we're already in what I would call a pretty good place, and are continuing the drive around, well, how do we keep this going and keep the momentum to make sure we're truly inclusive? And I'll end it there. Thank you, Jane.
No, that's great, Steve. Thank you. And we want to hear an awful lot more. This is such an important thing in the workplace anyway, but Hen, I know you were particularly keen to sort of talk about the ONS statistics that were in the recent census. You know, there is a large chunk of the population now that identify as LGBTQ plus, transgender, or don't even give their, you know, don't want to sort of be a particular sexuality, gender. If you haven't got young people feeling comfortable coming through to the workplace, you're not going to have a workforce, are you, at some stage, if you can't, you know, make the environment welcoming and respectful and supportive?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think pretty much every single business in the UK will be grappling with how to become more equitable, diverse, and inclusive across the board. You know, for all minority groups. And I think previously we've framed it as, you know, it's a good thing to do for your business, and that's not wrong. But equally, it's not even a discussion or a debate. I mean, it's just you owe it to everybody who either works for you or with you to be an organization at which people feel able to be themselves, but equally are able to progress within the organization regardless of their background, whether that's LGBTQ plus identity or race, nationality, gender, etc., etc. So I think there's a really interesting and, you know, hours, months, years long discussion about the different rates at which LGBTQ plus organizations evolve and people within those organizations evolve, because we've had a few people on the panel kind of hint at, you know, if Steve's father were learning, without speaking about your father, who I don't know, Stephen, but his understanding of and grappling with issues, you would imagine would be slightly different to a 24-year-old who's just walked into a London office for the first time. So it's very difficult from a work point of view, because you're talking to a great swathe of people. And for some of those people, it's literally just let me walk into the office and don't hate crime me. But then at the other end, it's got to be a lot more than that. It's got to be how are you actively an ally? How do you support Harris, Emma, Craig, Steve, and others in their day-to-day life every day, all the time? Because we've got to evolve from just being able to be yourself. It's thriving, and as Emma kind of intimated, you know, your identity being part of what makes you special, not just, you know, let's tolerate the LGBT people in the organization, but let's make our whole business work for everyone in it, regardless of their background. And I think businesses have got a lot to do and evolve, I think, to make it as welcoming for as many people as possible.
So, Craig, you obviously you started this programme back in the days in the Welsh Parliament. So what worked, and how did you persuade that swathe of older employees who really didn't get it, didn't understand it? How did you get through to them, and how do you think workforces and employers can do that today?
Well, I talked about incremental changes earlier, wasn't it? Didn't I? And I think we did various things, but what we always did was celebrate success, or tell our story, or post a picture on the staff intranet, and that kind of thing. And then, if you hold views that are anti all of that, then actually you're no longer in the bigger group of people who are enjoying that celebration. And being part of something that's positive in the workplace. So often in workplaces, people are looking to join other things on the social side of things. Our Allies programme, we went out to the 5 political groups in the Welsh Parliament. We went out to our staff. We started off with the leadership team at Management Board and said, do you all want to sign up to this to be an ally? And they all said, yes, there's going to be a good reason not to be in something like that. Why wouldn't we? And of course, that sort of sets the tone. And then we put stuff out on our internet and said, would you like to be an ally? One of the things we didn't do was really, we did one thing. We promised not to use up too much of people's time. So the biggest call was an annual photo op with the rainbow and progress flags and the transgender flags. And we got politicians involved, and we always then got the media the Welsh media interested, and they would take photos, and so we'd get some publicity out of that, of what the Welsh Parliament was doing for LGBT History Month or International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia, etc. What we didn't do was we didn't prepare people for what it meant to be an ally. So we gave them a cardboard thing that you folded in a Toblerone, we called them, and it said, I'm an ally to the LGBT network. So we printed them and they put them on their desks next to their computers and things. What we didn't do was give them tips on what it meant to be an ally. So we had some feedback, so we produced a top 10 thing. The resources are out there, they're easy to get hold of. Organizations like Stonewall or other networks, they've all got these things. So don't reinvent the wheel, just use your contacts and get hold of them and adapt them for your own suitability. And I suppose one of the positive things that came out of all of that was that when we started taking in work experience people through a Stonewall Young People's Work Placement Programme, it was one of the things they noticed straight away. So I had feedback on that they had noticed that people had those, and it made them feel straight away a little bit more that they were able to be themselves. So that was really good. I can't say that I found there were particular barriers with people not. I suppose they became a silent minority if they didn't want to get involved. Obviously, we did have an inclusive workplace. We prided ourselves on that and being an inclusive parliament. It was one of the things that was built into our founding legislation. One of them was being bilingual, one was being about equality, and one of them was about sustainability. So it was a bit of a legislative backbone that gave people like me, who were in a minority, and other network leads, a little bit of a platform so that we could push these things forward. And as I got more senior in the organisation as well, that comes with privilege and power as well. So I was able to get these things through without much difficulty. I'm not saying everybody in a workplace, if they're a network chair, they might be at a lower or middle management level. And then, what you probably need is a champion or a senior leader who's going to kind of back you and help you at the different levels where you might find it more difficult to infiltrate if you don't have sufficient clout within the organization. And there are different ways of doing things, and lots of networks will tell you of their own experiences, which would be different to my kind of lived experience through the whole thing.
Harris, is it easier if you're in a sort of political sphere or a creative industry to get people to understand LGBTQ plus issues, whereas if you're in a more traditional type of industrial setting, that becomes a bit more difficult because you have got that kind of older employee base who just don't get it?
I think it really depends. I don't know if I would kind of criticize any particular industry, because I think within those industries are companies that are set up. I'm a millennial. I'm in my mid-30s, and I think there are a lot of particularly industrial companies that are a bit older now, but a lot of their kind of management are now my generation. So I wouldn't say anything about that, but I think it's all down to the companies. What I see is as the big factor is how sheltered people are and how much they're in a bubble that they've been in for 20 years. If there's no fresh blood or no, you're not kind of integrated with the rest of the community. For example, I went to a very multicultural school, and it was a bit elitist, but we were definitely brought up with this idea that different isn't bad. And, even in the first year that we were at school, we were taken around all the different places of worship, for example. And whilst this was all during Section 28, where we weren't allowed to talk about LGBT stuff, there was at least some of this value there that, you know, being inclusive and accepting people for who they are was a big deal. So I was going somewhere with this. But typical way.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Harris, you
Yeah.
mentioned earlier on that you'd been on a training day and that had been very difficult and wasn't really kind of inclusive. Let's look at the policies, training, what needs to be in the workplace for those incidents not to happen as much or at all, hopefully. What practically do organisations need to be doing?
I think it's relatively simple. Now that I'm on this side of it, although I understand that if you're new to it, it might seem like a bit of a minefield. But to put it in its simplest way, I think that you have to make sure that whoever your potentially new trans non-binary employee or LGBT employee, whoever they're going to come into contact with, you need to make sure that every place that you're sending them, people there are inclusive, not just that they've got a badge somewhere that they took part in the training, but that they actually are actively inclusive. You know, even so much as having a casual chat with maybe a new employee, like, you know, we have employees under this umbrella, like, what are your, you know, do you need any support in kind of inclusivity training in that area? If you don't feel that you're up to scratch with it all, there's something we can provide for you. Because my experience was very much that, on the one hand, the sector of the NHS that I work in, their intentions were absolutely brilliant, and it was one of the reasons that I took the job. But I don't think they had any idea that there needed to be any preparation. And so many times I got sent into situations that turned out not well. And it was really down to me to handle it professionally over and over again, despite how unpleasant it was. And, you know, I think, like what Emma was saying earlier, you kind of get used to coming out over and over again and correcting people and people making assumptions about you. So you do get used to it. But I think to kind of put that weight and put that burden on your employee or your colleague to constantly field that and constantly be the one finding out where there's a discrepancy is poor form, and that employers need to be much better informed and prepared to support their LGBTQ plus employees. It's not good enough just to say, oh yeah, you're fine, we accept you for whoever you are. It's not enough. The world is not us shaped enough yet for it to be safe to do that.
Craig, you wanted to come in there.
I did actually. When you asked Harris your initial question, it reminded me of something. So I just quickly wanted to cover it because not everything is easy. As I said, there were no barriers and that kind of thing. You know, we in the Parliament, you have to. There's a big risk factor about security, and in our security team, which is a large team of nearly all men, it was a big group, and it was a different culture there to the rest of the floors where it was more inclusive, and so you get the kind of laddish mentality there. So as an organisation, we had to do different things. So we had to maybe more intense training or training in a different way, using examples of things that happen in the workplace and presenting them in a different way to try and get the message through. And then we had a terrible incident a few years ago where there were allegations of sexual abuse abuse allegations against one of our elected members, who then committed suicide, and we had to revamp the whole thing. And I think in your introduction, you said that I led on the dignity and respect. So following those dreadful incidences, I did take the lead on that. It was kind of one of the last year of my life in the Welsh Parliament. I worked on that. And part of that was a campaign to say your rights to call it out and to call out inappropriate behaviour in the workplace. And some of that was we did more intense training with the security team than perhaps with some other teams who were already tuned into all of that, and just to make sure that the whole workplace culture was right for everybody, and that sort of feeds into the what Harris was just saying. I think is you can't just say it; you've got to do something about it in workplaces, and you might have to do different things with different groups of people. So that's the only thing I wanted to add.
That's a very interesting point. And Steve, coming to you, because you said that you've started the process of trying to make your organisation much more inclusive. Can you give us some idea of some of the things that you've found that have worked really well so far?
Yeah, very happy to. I think I'll start with the first thing I noticed on the first day I went into the office, which was about 6 months after I actually started working for the authority because of COVID lockdowns at the time. It took a while to get into the office. But what I noticed was there was no non-binary toilet. We had female toilets, we had male toilets. And I remembered from previous learning that actually that's something that we should sort out, so it doesn't put any non-binary individuals in that position of feeling anxious about having to use either one. So very quickly, our office manager got onto that. We introduced a toilet for all, and we put shelves in that toilet. So if we ever have a member of staff who uses a binder on their chest, they don't have to worry about having to put that on the floor if they're going to take it off during the day. I'd heard once again from forums like this that someone was forced to put their binder on the floor and then they felt dirty for the rest of the day. And we wouldn't want to put our staff in that position. Very easy win on that front. Someone mentioned about kind of tone from the top and the importance of that. So making sure that we were open about that at our senior team, and that we enabled and empowered the organization to think and act in an inclusive way. And we do that, of course, through a policy, but you can write words on a page and it have no effect. So then we reinforce that through behaviors and action. So we celebrate things like LGBTQ plus History Month and Pride Month and Ida Hobbit Day. And we have a staff network, which is our diversity, equality and inclusion network. What I particularly like about that is it's very intersectional. So we cover all protected characteristics within that group, because our staff decided that's what would work best for us, rather than have, say, an LGBTQ plus staff network or a disability staff network. And from that has sprung, for example, a menopause cafe that's open to all to talk about matters of menopause. And I suppose I'm just saying what I like is the fact that these things can evolve. They don't need too much structure. They just need people interested and wanting to make a difference. And at a very basic level, I'd say ask your organization to make sure that you're capturing the protected characteristics of your staff, that you're getting good completion levels in your HR data system, and then using that to inform the big decisions that we have to make as employers, and looking at people survey results as well. So our latest people survey results, delighted to see 92% of our LGBTQ plus staff feel that we are an inclusive place to work. We'll work on getting that to 100% now, but 92% is a really good place for us to be at this point in time.
Steve, that's great to hear. Hen, I just wanted to come to you about some people find the language difficult, don't they? And you and I have talked about this briefly before. The importance of pronouns. Can you explain why that is so important? That people do use the correct pronouns, and that the language, as much as they can do to try and use that language in the workplace, and what language is acceptable and what's not.
I think actually everybody understands the importance of pronouns, because everybody has their own pronouns. It's just that in the last few years, it's become more common for people to ask to use pronouns that are out of the norm. I've been on a little bit of a journey with this, where I've ranged from being incredibly understanding and accepting of people not getting it, to being slightly more impatient. Not with getting it wrong. I think getting it wrong is absolutely going to happen, and that's fine, and that's understandable. And there is definitely a role there for people to accept and understand that it's not going to be perfect all the time. But I think sometimes we frame it as kind of huge labor for people to get pronouns correct. But I don't think it is. I think that we actually use they, them pronouns a lot in English language. We do it if someone's been round to fix something at the house, if you've been to the doctor, what did they say? If we don't, or someone's left their phone, I'll give them a call. I'm sure they're missing it. When we don't know someone's gender, we use they and them. So it's not actually a massive shift to just stop assuming people's gender upon meeting them, and then using he, him, she, her if that's how they feel is preferable to them, as most people will at the moment. But you're right, Jane. I talked to my mum about this, and my mum is very, look, I'm going to get it wrong, and she does get it wrong sometimes, and I'm not going to shout at her, obviously. It means a lot to me when people get my pronouns right, because it means to me that they're not purely seeing me as a man when I've told them that I'm not that. So I think it's basic respect, and I know people will get it wrong, and that is absolutely fine. And a sorry and an attempt to get better is all I think anybody's asking for. But equally, I think it's on everyone to be curious. And I think some of what Steve said there is so fantastic, to be curious about other people and what is inclusion to them. So the Binder story is a fantastic one, because there's a curiosity about that person's lived experience, and there's a desire to make it better for them. And I think that extends to pronouns as well. So, we talked a little bit about history, and obviously relevant being LGBTQ plus History Month, but it wasn't that long ago that everybody would talk about their boyfriend or their girlfriend. These days, a lot more people talk about their partner, regardless of the gender of their partner. And it's a really great example of a little shift forward. Lots of my friends, cis straight friends, will talk about their partner. And that's come from us not assuming that a man is with a woman and a woman is with a man. And that's still a work in progress. People will definitely still, as Emma outlined when she was the back of that taxi, people will still be wrongly clocked for things that is not relevant to anybody else. But I think that shift in language, oh, have you got a partner? I don't know whether they're male or female or non-binary, and it doesn't matter to me. Is a next shift, I think, in gender, because when I walk into a shop, I know they're going to say hello, sir, and they don't need to. They absolutely don't need to. Gendering everything is actually very self-defeating for all of us, not just people who stand slightly away from the binaries of gender. So I've gone off a little bit of a rant, Jane. I apologise.
Not at all. A rant is always good. I just wanted to bring Emma in on this, because this is pertinent really to being a parent in the workplace as well, and the language around that. Emma, I know we chatted a little bit about this previously. If there's a social do, and you're inviting partners, there's just easy language to use around that doesn't hopefully discriminate, really, Emma. Is that right?
Yeah, I'll tell you what is fascinating. Since I've become a parent, I've become so aware of the gender binary. And what is it about having a baby that they get misgendered all the time? And I get really annoyed on her behalf, and they might grow up to, identify as whatever, and they'll be welcome to do that. But so many people misgender the baby. If I'm not dressing the baby in a pink dress, it's, oh, how old is he? And they have to say he or she in all the sentences. So I just find it absolutely fascinating how we are so strict on the gender binary, and becoming a parent has made me really aware of that. I just wanted to ask Ken something, I think, because one thing that we always say is about using pronouns, and, do you find it useful that, everyone else is using pronouns, putting it on their Twitter bios, putting it on email footers, stuff like that? Is that useful to sort of just increase awareness, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I do think so. I think we're in a very interesting phase where there's some people going, almost, oh, what does it mean to do that? Like, it doesn't really change anything. But it just to normalize it on this panel is a great example where straight away everybody thinks about, oh, that means that, oh, okay, fine, I'm not going to get that wrong. And on Microsoft Teams, you have the option to add your pronouns, and it's in my head, all of those people at my company who have done it, I really appreciate their support. And interestingly, there aren't as many men as there are women. So I reckon 5, 6, 7 men at my company have gone, okay, I'll do that. That's a useful thing. And maybe 20 plus women have thought, okay, I'll do that. That's a useful thing. I definitely think it's useful. I think if we're being hypercritical, and it wouldn't apply to people on this panel, sometimes I think people think, oh, that's all I need to do that. Job done. I understand non-binary issues. Happy days. Move on. It's a really good thing. It's a helpful thing. I think we need to, as Steve talked about, do that and then do the curiosity about what it actually means to be that person, whoever they may be, and how to help them. But yes, Emma, I totally think it's useful.
That's good. That's something I always advise, but it's good to know that it is actually helpful. Yeah,
thank you for that. I know we've only got sort of 10 minutes or so left, and I just want to bring in a question that we've had, which Harris and Hen, you might have a view on. They were asking somebody from LinkedIn, and thank you for the question, that following recent events involving hate crimes against transgender people, are you reconsidering the actions you take in your workplace to protect trans colleagues? And to Hen and Harris, what can we do to allies? What can allies do, to better ensure safety? I don't know if you want to, both of you, sort of tackle that.
I've talked a lot, Harris, so if you want to, you're very welcome to. But I'm also not just dodging the question. I'll happily answer it.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult, especially with the death that's been talked about in the media of the trans girl in the last week. I think that the biggest thing that we can do as allies is to be really outspoken about our support, and just to really drive home with anybody, especially in difficult situations, that trans people are human beings as well, and that regardless of what people think, they have a right to their own life. And to, I don't know, kind of make transphobia like super unpopular. And I think that unless you're particularly engaged in the community, you don't necessarily have an idea of what everyone is dealing with. For example, I wrote to our MP last year about including trans people in the conversion therapy ban. And I got a response from the House of Commons, and I left it on the kitchen table for my family to see. And the response I got from most of my family was like, I didn't even know that was still allowed here. I didn't even know conversion therapy was still legal in this country. So I just think, whilst we can't be experts and we've got our own lives to live, and we might not have time to kind of be an activist 24/7, I think just having even a basic knowledge of what the climate currently is for our community in general, and making sure that other people are aware of that, and that they're not allowed to get away with even casual phobia. That's what I would say.
Hen?
May I just, I think it's a fantastic question, and it was on my mind coming into this panel, actually. I think Harris has articulated it brilliantly. I think the one thing I'd add is that sometimes, and we will all have had this, in LGBTQ plus spaces, I think sometimes we have the possibility to become complacent about where we've come from and the progress that we've made. And I think we have an incredibly real example with the way that the UK media is dealing with trans people in this country at the moment, that you never take for granted the progress that the generations before you made, or the rights the generation before you won, because they can be taken away. And it's terrifying and incredibly depressing that we are actively going backwards as a nation on trans rights. And obviously our remit today is to talk about the workplace, and in a way we're incredibly privileged to be able to do that. But I think it just serves a really good reminder, you know, this horrifying story over the weekend and the media storm that's been whipped up across the last 2 years that kind of started with, you know, should trans women be able to play sports with cis women, and has become, you know, essentially just a hate-filled cesspit of disgusting thoughts and you know, to all trans people. So I think it serves. I don't have an answer to the question other than it's a fantastic question, and I think it serves a really good reminder that we should never be complacent, and we should always celebrate and continue to fight for progress, because it can be taken away from you quite quickly, I think.
Thanks very much, both of you, for answering that one. We'll just round off then with maybe just a thought from each of you, really, about the sorts of things that we should be thinking about when we are trying to be supportive to LGBT plus colleagues in the workplace. I don't know if there's kind of one piece of learning that you'd like the people watching us today to sort of take away with them. Emma, could we start with you?
Yeah, and one thing is just very simple, and it's just don't assume. Do not assume that all your colleagues are straight or cisgendered. And I think straight people are guilty of doing that quite often. And do not assume that just because we're in 2023, that those people that are out and proud have had an easy journey. There's a lot of people who have gone through a lot of struggles to be living their truths now. So do not assume that everything's fine and dandy just because we've got gay marriage and just because it's 2023. There's still a lot of people really having a tough time with their families or with their own identities and with their own mental health problems. So do not assume that everyone's the same as you and that everyone's having an easy ride of it, because they're not. And finally, just to echo Harris's point, actually, you know, and if you ever hear homophobia or transphobia in the workplace, call it out. Do not let people get away with what they think are innocent little comments like, oh, that's so gay. It's not acceptable. Yeah. You know, it can have a really detrimental effect. So call it out and report it if it's safe to do so. And that's probably it from me, because I know we're getting towards the end.
No, that's great, Emma. Thank you. Steve, how would you sum up your thoughts as to what people should be thinking about?
I would say if you're on this journey in your workplace, don't overthink it. Don't get scared of the mammoth task ahead, and just think, you know, this is a journey. It's not a race to the top of the mountain. There is lots of good practice out there, from forums like this to CIPD, to ACAS, and of course, good old Stonewall. So use your networks and these groups to help you on that journey.
Thank you. Harris?
I think the bottom line is that you have to, I think if you really care about making places inclusive and you really care about people's well-being, it needs to be something that you partake in actively going forward. You might not speak about it or do this kind of thing every day, but it absolutely needs to be something you're committed to in the long run, and that you need to get really involved with and kind of get over your fear of being an amateur and get involved anyway.
Thank you. Hen?
I don't think I can add much beyond what is said. I think some incredible things have been said. I think to people on this call will almost be the converted, because they're here, they're curious, they want to learn. I think that is a fantastic approach to take, and just show up. Just you know, in addition to holding the rainbow flag, which is a fantastic and meaningful, important thing to do, be an ally when it matters, call things out, be there for the people around you who can really benefit from your support.
Brilliant, thank you. And Craig, last but not least.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to add, really. I mean, I feel after, you know, Harris and especially Hen spoke a few minutes ago, I feel like quite upset about what trans and non-binary people are having to go through at the moment and their lived experience. And so I became all angry and riled, and I was trying to write some notes, and I got all in the jumble. And so I think in a nutshell, I'd say there is a lot of hate out there. We've heard it before. Back in the 80s and 90s, it was then against gay men. It's now against trans and non-binary people. I'd say in terms of the workplace context, you've got to make sure you've got the right policies and procedures in place to make it an inclusive culture. You as an employer, you want to be an employer of choice. So you want a diverse workforce. It'll make for a better workforce. So you've got to call out inappropriate behaviour, and don't give up. I think we're in the right, we are in the right in terms of inclusion, and we've got to keep fighting this battle, because since Brexit basically has given people a platform, and some of these inappropriate behaviours and views will seep into the workplace. That's why you've got to be strong on this.
Thank you very much, everybody, for those fantastic pieces of insight and advice. And I hope everybody that's joined this call today takes something away that they can do in their workplace. Just before we wrap up, to remind you a little bit about what we do here at Frog Systems. We are a provider of employee wellbeing support through a digital platform called Ashia. And that allows your employees to go on and listen to lived experience stories, learn from others, and find help and support if you need it. It's also where employers can use the anonymised data that's generated to help be more strategic in their provision of wellbeing and mental health support for their employees as well. You can find out much more about that on our website, and please do follow us on social media in the weeks and months to come. But thank you so much to our panel today. You've all been amazing guests, and really appreciated your input. And everybody just go off and hopefully enjoy your day. Thank you so much.